Hello everyone and welcome to the demonstration video for Access Chapter 2. Alright, so in Chapter 1, that was the introduction to creating a table for a database. Again, that was creating the table itself and then adding on the fields as well as including data for each of those records. Notice that the fields themselves are very structured, and actually Access is very nitpicky to how you want to include those fields. And how do you do the data types, even down to how big do you want the data to be, down to the characters. And that's why we use databases. It's a lot more of a structured way to hold onto data. And in this video, you're going to see a lot more of why we use applications like Access as a database management system to keep track of all this data as compared to having to solely rely on Excel. Again, Access looks like Excel, but it's a lot more stingier, and again, you'll see why in a moment. All right. But of course, if you want to follow along with the skills we'll be learning today, or you want to take notes, the skeleton notes are here for you to download. And these are the in-class documents we're going to use for this demo. I'm going to have you go ahead and download both of them, starting with the Excel file here. So the service history data file, go ahead and download it. We're not going to use it yet, but just make sure you have it downloaded. And then you're going to download this pre-made database I have called Equipment Rentals. So go ahead and give it a download, and I'm going to have you open it up. So again, you could go to your File Explorer, to your Downloads folder, and double click, open it up. It'll take you to Access. If you have an Enable Editing sign, make sure you hit the Enable Editing button. The security risks, again, there's special things you could do with Access that could pose a harm to the computer, depending on how other people code it. But we could just hit the X. Our program files are good for you to use. All right, let me have you, let's open this up real quick. Before we open the tables here, the equipment, there are some things that I do need to show you when it comes to creating a table. So you're probably wondering, Miss Ojeda, didn't we create a table with fields in Chapter 1? We did, but there is another way in which you could do that. Let's go ahead. So remember, if we want to create a new table, let's go to our Create tab. And then in the tables group, which is along the left side, you're going to click on table. There we go. And I'm going to increase the text size so you could see this a little better. Although we're not going to be seeing this view a whole lot. Okay. So this view that you were used to, you could use this to include fields and add data records here. But the biggest part is make sure you're in your home tab. Actually, I believe, yeah, you could be in almost any other tab, either the table fields tab or your home tab. And you'll notice there's a button on the far left called views. It has, there we go. It has a ruler symbol on it. I'm going to have you click on the drop down. So don't click on the button, click on the drop down. And you'll see two options, one called Datasheet View and the other called Design View. The Datasheet View has a little black highlight around it, and that's currently what we're seeing here. So the view is how we look at the table of the database. Datasheet View indicates that this is, we're looking at the actual data itself, so the records that are inserted. Now, if you click into Design View, so go ahead and click on the option for Design View. Oh, it wants us to save the table. Let's go ahead. I'm just going to call this test. We're not going to be using this table a whole lot. This is just to show you the different view. Let me click OK. And this is the new view that pops up for you. Now, unfortunately, I cannot increase the text size for this since Access is a little weird with that. But I'll try to explain as best as I can with words of what you should be seeing. Okay, but you'll see it basically looks like a table with 3 rows, but this isn't for your records. So if you remember with the other view, each row is how we put in our actual data for the table. But what this is actually how we create our fields. So instead of doing it by column, we could indicate fields kind of like if it was its own little table. So notice the first row says ID and it's set to auto number. So this row here is dedicated to the field ID, which is given by default. And if I want to rename it, you could always go into the box for the field name. So the first column is field name, and let's call this item ID. Remember, no spaces, item ID. There we go. And I'm going to leave auto number as is just because I actually for this, let's go ahead and change it from auto number to short text. There we go. Perfect. So we've actually edited the ID field as we saw in the other view. And if we want to add in more fields, then you could just go down along this row and keep on including field names. So for example, maybe let's just pretend that this table is for keeping track of certain items that we have in stock. Then we would want to know the item name. So the next field name we want is item name, no spaces. And then I could click or tab over to the next cell in the row, and we could indicate the data type, which let's do short text. And the description is freely available here for us to include. Again, this is just for your eyes to help figure out what each field is. So this one we could just put name of the item. There we go. And if we want to keep on adding more fields, again, you just go down the row. So let's just do one more. Let's do item price. I'll just put in price. There we go. The short text, let's do currency. And in the description, we'll just put price of the item per unit. There we go. Now, you could go ahead and click the save button if you would want. But when you go back to the other views, so again, even in the table design tab that we're currently in, you could click on there we go, you see on the far left, you still have the views group, and you could click on the drop down and select the datasheet view. And look, we didn't change anything. We didn't change anything directly in the datasheet view, but let me expand this for everyone to see. There we go. It has included the different fields that we included in the design view. So that's another way to add in fields. And again, notice I could still type in stuff as I want. This is for putting in records. So if I want the item ID to be 123, maybe this is a book and the price per book is $10. There we go. And we could keep on adding more. Maybe this is a spatula. And let's say $5 spatula. There we go. All right. So once again, you could still add new fields with the datasheet view, but the datasheet view is dedicated more to including the actual data in the table. Design view, which we will be working with a lot in this project. The design view is for creating the fields as well as making them a lot more structured. Okay, we're going to work on this just a little more before we move into other parts of the skills you need to learn. But let's take a look at each field in the design view. And notice when I click into each row, something changes along the bottom. Let me see if I could pull it up. Actually, unfortunately, I cannot pull it up. But every time you click into each row, there are different field properties down here on the bottom that you could use. Each of these properties help make the fields more structured. What do I mean by that is that there could be a lot more rules in how data can actually be put in. So you'll notice, let's click into the item name row. Again, you can click in any cell within that row, or you could click on the actual row itself, kind of like how we do with Excel or the datasheet view. And you'll see down here in the field properties, the first property is field size. And if you want to change it, you just click into the cell next to the property name. And then you could delete the contents and include what you would like. So maybe we want the field size to be 20. There we go. So 20 characters for the item name. And you could just click away and it should be saved in. Okay. And the same goes, well, price doesn't have a field size because prices could be infinite. Item ID, since it's set to short text, does have a field size. Maybe let's put this to 3. There we go. And so on. So this is another way to edit field sizes. Also notice your caption is also indicated here, so you could change that as well. Okay, so those are some of the properties you could use. Another property you could use is something called an input mask. So we have field size to indicate how big of the data we allow to be stored into the record, into that specific field. But let's say, like in this case, maybe let's do a random field for items where it was last date purchased. Or just date purchased. This is a bit of a long name, but let's go ahead and do that. And this is going to be, let's put this as an actual date and time. And for the description, let's go ahead and put the last date in which we ordered a new batch of item. Something like that. Okay. Now, when we go over to our datasheet view, and every time you switch back and forth, you may get this error. It's more of a warning saying you must save the table. Go ahead and click yes to save it. And if you get this is just telling you, hey, you changed some things within the properties that might change how the table looks. Are you okay with that? Typically, you want to say yes, but for the future, if you are working with databases a lot more, be more cautious when this sign pops up. But let's go ahead and click yes. There we go. And let's take a look at our last date purchased, which notice it pops up as, there we go, pops up as a date that we could include. Every time we go into the cell, we get this little calendar icon on the right, and you could choose certain dates. There we go. Now, let me have you go back to the design view. And there is a specific way in which we can have dates typed in. So notice, actually let's go back to the datasheet view. Notice this goes by month, day, year format. Maybe this isn't how we wanted the data put in. Maybe we actually wanted the name of the month and just the 2 last digits of the year or something similar. Let's go back to our design view, and there is a way to indicate that. So let's click into the row for the last date purchased field. And down here in the field properties, you'll see that there is an option called input mask. Go ahead and click into the input mask with just the cell itself, and you'll notice all the way on the far right, there's 3 little dots. Go ahead and click that. And it's asking me to save. Let me click yes. There we go. And a window will pop up called the Input Mask Wizard. And what this is basically different formats that you will decree for the user to put in. I know that's kind of a weird way to say it, but this is basically a way to ensure that if you want data to be put in a very specific way, like in this case, maybe, again, the current setup is using the short date format where we have the month, day, and year. But maybe we want this format down here, the medium date, which is by the day, month with the actual part of the name of it, and the year at the end, just the last 2 digits. So if this is what we wanted and not the other one, then we could indicate that to the user. So the Input Mask Wizard, again, kind of gives you a format to specifically do it. So if you want the specific mask to apply, then go ahead and choose the one that fits to your liking. So in this case, we're going to do the medium date. And if you want to ensure that's what you want to use, this text box down here called try it just shows you what would appear if someone tried to put in data into that cell. Okay. Then once you have that confirmed, click next. And this is just if you want to make little changes of that mask. So again, how people put in the data. If you have access to the book, or again, you could use the Microsoft resources to actually know how to code this. But for this course, you don't have to worry too much about it. Again, this is just know that you could customize it a lot more. But let's leave this be. I'm going to have you click next again and then finish. Okay, so now when I notice that mask is included down here in the field properties, and when I go back to my datasheet view, click yes to save. There we go. If we delete this here, there we go. And then we tried typing, if we wanted to actually type in the date, notice we have this setup where it has little lines on the bottom and dashes. And if I tried typing in stuff, let's say, there we go. I tried typing that in. Oh, actually that isn't supposed to happen, but that's probably because there's another formatting we have to do. That more specifically probably has to do with, there we go, the date and time format. You'd have to change it to actually appear in such way. But something like this is actually very nice and more prominent. Notice when you use things like the cell phone number. Having a specific mask to show people, hey, you're putting a cell phone number in here, so the 3 little sections, that's very good to use an input mask for. Okay. Yeah, notice when I click in, it gives me a specific format in which I have to type it in. Unfortunately, it reverts back to the other format, but of course you could change it with the table fields formatting. Okay, let me go back to the design view. Also notice another way to format is here in the field properties. You just have to go all the way to the right and click on the drop down, and there's different formats you could choose from, which the one we actually want to input is here, the medium date. There we go. And let me go ahead and save real quick. All right. So that's your input mask. Again, just make sure you are clicking into the field property cell and choosing that little icon on the far right. Again, it's kind of hard to see. And apologies for those who have maybe smaller screens and can't see the text. Unfortunately, this is how it is going to be for the design view. Okay. One last thing I'll show for the properties is something known as the validation rule and validation text. So let's take a look at our datasheet view. Okay. So notice each of our items, we want to go by an item ID where there's three characters, so 3 characters long. And here, let's keep it to the same idea that it's 3 numbers. Okay, so you could, let's say if this is for a store, you could tell your employees, okay, when you put in the item ID, it has to be 3 digits. And no matter how much you tell them, of course, people may accidentally do something incorrect. For instance, I could very easily type in A12, and then notice nothing happens to the database. It's not going to give me any warnings, and I could just keep on going with inserting data like that. And just with that simple error, it could mess with everything in the database, as well as any applications that may be working with this database. So to prevent simple errors from this like this happening, or even silly errors, like if someone accidentally put in unicorns, although right now it's limited to 3 characters, so we're good there. But again, what if something like this happens? That's when we could apply a validation rule. Let's go back to our design view. Okay. And we want to do the validation rule for the ID. So make sure you select any cell within the item ID row, or you could select the row itself. Okay. Now, look down in your field properties, you'll see that there are two properties called field rule and field text. Field rule is the condition in which we are applying to the field itself, to any data that is included in the field. If you have access to the textbook or you see the Microsoft resources, you'll notice that it does involve some programming knowledge, pretty much. A lot of symbols, a lot of representations of how you could interact with the data, as well as other fields. Again, you don't need to know all of those little intricacies, but it would be very nice to mess around with in your own time. The validation rule is the rule we apply to the data being put in. So I'm going to do something similar to what you're going to be using in the project. We're going to go into the cell for validation rule and type in capital L, lowercase I, lowercase k, lowercase e. So like. And then click space, do a quotation mark and another quotation mark. Then make sure you put your insertion point in between those quotation marks. So what this means is, okay, whatever is put into that cell, so that data for that field, it has to be like a certain pattern we give it. So there's kind of a little code that we could put in for how data can be patterned out. That's anything within those quotations. So the like says, hey, it has to be equal to this pattern in the quotations. Now, if we want to indicate that it needs to be a digit, and a digit, so 3 digits, then we have to use the pound symbol or the hashtag symbol 3 times. So each of those you can think of as placeholders for what should be put into that field. So it's going to be pound, so 3 pound symbols, or if you use hashtag, 3 hashtag symbols in those quotations. So this will ensure that, one, any data that is put into that field will be 3 digits. So all numbers, no characters, like alphabet. But it also ensures that only 3 digits are inserted. So if someone accidentally puts in 1 digit, it will actually give an error saying, hey, it needs to be 3, because that's the formatting we're keeping for the ID. Okay, so we have the validation rules set, and be very careful, because if you do mess this up, it could mess with your project entirely. Actually, it could pretty much prevent you from moving on or editing any other thing in your table, even correcting the mistake. If that does happen to you, unfortunately, I do suggest starting from the very beginning, because again, it won't even let you correct your mistake from that point. Okay, but we have the validation rule. Don't move on yet. We still want to do something called the validation text, which simply, it's the error message that pops up if it doesn't follow the rule. So anything we put in the validation text is what will appear kind of as a little warning. So in this case, I'll just put in ID needs to be 3 digits. Okay. So again, validation rules, the actual rule we apply, that will have that kind of code-like feel in it. Validation text, you could put anything as long as it indicates to the user, hey, what needs to be put in here is this rule. Okay, and let's give it a try. Let's go ahead and save. So again, you could do Control S, or you can click the save button up at the top left. And it's telling me, especially with validation rule, this one's very crucial. It's saying, hey, there was a rule made. Some of your data may not align with that rule. Is that okay? We'll click yes. And yeah, it's saying existing. There we go. Existing fields do not apply. Click yes. And then let's go switch to our datasheet view. So let me go ahead, delete the contents in this field. And maybe I just want to leave it like this. Let me click away. Oh, and notice an error message pops up. It says ID needs to be 3 digits. Again, the rule is set, so if Notice I didn't put anything in that field, but it's assuming, hey, it needs to be 3 digits. So you can click OK, and let's go ahead and just put in 000. So when I click away, it lets me move on. If I go back into that field and put in a letter anywhere, so 00A, and let me click away. I want to work on something else. Oh, error message pops up again. ID needs to be 3 digits. Then you have to go back and edit it to apply to that rule. There we go. And then you could move on with the rest of the data submission. Let me go ahead and save. So notice that's how very nitpicky the rule could be. It didn't even let me do anything else. I couldn't even close the table if I wanted to. You do have to be careful with how you do the validation rule. Okay, so just keep that in mind, but it is a very good tool to make sure that correct data is being put in and not any nonsense or even accidental nonsense. Okay, we are done with messing around with this test table. We could go ahead and close out of it. And now I'm going to have you take a look at why we actually use databases. Okay, so back to our little paint board, and I'm going to use the Amazon example again. So if you didn't see in chapter 1, don't worry, we're going to go over it once more, hopefully in a simpler way. But again, I do have students ask, why can't we just use Excel for all of this? Well, Excel is nice if you're keeping track of just kind of seemingly simple data and small amounts of data. But if you're a company like Amazon, where you're keeping track of multiple things such as customer accounts, down to their names, their credit card information, their addresses. So if you're keeping track of millions of customer accounts, and customers have even more orders to their accounts, and you have to keep track of the items not only being displayed on the website, but associated to those orders, you're going to need multiple tables for that, and not just multiple tables, but you need something to point to each other. So again, remember, customers can have, there we go, usually there's a field for an order history or something similar to that. So a field where they have different order histories with each of their unique IDs. So if you've ever seen that weird, if you've ever seen a weird set of characters or numbers for your order ID or the order number that they ask for when for customer service, this relates to a specific ID in order. So your order history can point to this other table, to other existing orders, and even then order has its own set. There we go. Orders can have multiple items related to them, which may have their own ID as well, depending on, again, the type of item, even who is selling this item. And that will also be in its own table being kept track of, let's say, things like stock, the pricing, information related to the manufacturer, and again, that's also its own table. So all of this, again, not only does it have to be kept track of in large tables, but you need a way for it to relate to each other. And of course, as you saw with the properties, we want it to be structured where, just in case, notice if one thing goes wrong with inserting data, then it could affect how they interact with each other. So the biggest reason why we use database management systems, or even databases in general, is something called relationships, which I do need to go in depth here with this example. So I'm going to have you open up the equipment table, and this one we're just going to take a quick look at. Okay, so notice equipment, let's say here, we're running a company in which we're loaning equipment or renting out equipment for certain other companies, people, and so on. This table here for equipment is dedicated specifically to each piece of equipment. So we have equipment ID for each product. You'll notice that each product has, there we go, it has a specific name, and we have comments related to each one. Okay. Go to your File Explorer. So I'm going to open my downloads and open up the service history data file. So go ahead and double click it. We're not going to edit anything here. There's just something I need to show you. Okay. So the service history information we have here, starting out as an Excel file, this is different services being performed on the equipment. So notice, especially when you look in the service type field, this could be anything down to maintaining the equipment, repairing it if it's broken, or just inspecting it to make sure that it's a-okay to rent out. Okay, but this will be its own table, and each service has its own ID, so you can think of it as kind of like a history. For something like doctor's appointment, there's you as the patient, but then there may be a database held for each visit you went to the doctor or for certain checkups. This is something similar but for equipment. So notice each you can think of as doctor visit for the equipment has its own ID. But then if you look in these fields, there's another ID field, but this is dedicated to equipment. Let me bring my paint again and clear out some things. Okay, to make sense of those two ID fields that we saw, I'm going to have to explain two terminologies real quick. Again, we're going to have two tables. In this case, we're just going to indicate it as table 1 and table 2, but one would be the equipment history, so the service history, and the other would be the equipment itself. Each field has its own ID to uniquely identify each record. Again, that's kind of why each student has their own student ID, just in case there's duplicates, and also it does create some anonymity when referring to certain records. It would be kind of weird if you have certain technicians or administrators talking about a certain record and be like, oh yeah, it's so-and-so who's missing on this data. It'd be more professional if it's, oh, student ID, this is missing some data. So it's also some basically some dignity for the records in question. But the main ID is something known as a primary key. So that's the ID related to the records in the field, in the table itself. So if table 1 was dedicated to equipment, the ID would be dedicated for uniquely identifying each equipment piece. If table 2 was dedicated to a service, then here the ID would be dedicated to each service. Okay. Now I kind of had to switch up for this example, but again, just bear with me. Anytime a table has a field with another ID, that's called a foreign key. And what that means is that it's pointing to another ID in another table. So like in this case, maybe table 1 is referring to something else in table 2. So it points back to table 2. So the second ID does not uniquely identify every record in table 1. Actually, you could have duplicate foreign keys within this table, all of them pointing to maybe the same record in table 2. Okay? At least to better recognize it, primary keys, they typically don't duplicate or they do not repeat. Again, excuse my writing. So in a table, the primary key will not duplicate. They all have to be unique. But the foreign key just points to another table, so it could duplicate. You could test it out. Every time you go to an ID field with the primary key and you try putting in the same, actually, let's go ahead and try that out. There we go. So let's say we want to copy in the equipment ID. Let's say this ID, so you could copy and paste or type it in, is the same as this down here. And I try clicking away. Notice access will not let me because it's a primary key. It needs to be unique. So let me click OK, and let me do Control Z to put it back to its original state, and I'll save it. There we go. So keep that in mind. But if they were a foreign key, that would be completely okay. So those relate to relationships. That's how we create the relationship between different tables. One ID can point to another table saying, hey, I'm talking about that record over there. So let's go ahead and make sure we set up this correctly so we can get those relationships done. So one thing is ensuring the primary key. Let's do that first for our equipment table. Let's go to the design view. And you'll notice within these rows, the very first record has a key on the left side. That indicates that that row is a primary key. If we want to change the primary key, for instance, maybe for whatever reason the ID is actually the second row, then you select the row, and in your table design tab, there's a button in the tools group called primary key. It has a key symbol. You could just click it and it switches over. So this would be saying that the product name is the primary key, which again is not recommended practice. You want to make sure the ID itself, so a random set of numbers or letters, is the primary key. So let me click that back to that row and hit primary key. There we go. So you want to make sure you have those primary keys set and ready. Let's go ahead and exit out of this table. Let's go ahead and save the changes. There we go. And now if we want to create a relationship between two tables, we actually need two relatable tables. The test table we created does not count because that was just for demo purposes. We want to import our Excel file as a table. Now you're probably wondering, Miss Ojeda, do I have to create each of these fields for a new table? And the answer is, if this is your initial data for the table and you have everything set up like how you want it, you don't have to create the table in Access. You could actually import all of this as a new table. Watch this. Make sure you close out of the file you want to import into your database. So let's close this window. There we go. And the steps are very similar to adding data to an existing table. You're going to go to your external data tab and you're going to click new data source. And you're going to choose the file type that you're importing. So for us, since it's an Excel file, you'll select from file, select Excel. There we go. And here's our window that pops up again. Let me format this so you could see better. Okay. Now, the first step is the same. You're going to go ahead up here in the file name, click on Browse, and find the Excel file you want to import. So that's in my downloads, and it's called Service History Data File -02. Go ahead and select it and click Open. There we go. And now this part is important. So remember, in the previous project, you did append a copy of the records to a table. So that's adding on the data to an existing table. But we want to create a new one. So you're going to keep your selection in the import source data into a new table in the current database. So this will create a whole new table with the data we are putting in. So make sure the first option is selected, import the source data into a new table, then click OK. Now this one you do have to go through a little more step by step, especially if, again, this were an actual database and you're putting in data. You need to get your data types correct and the formatting correct. So the first window that pops up is asking you, hey, is the first row in that Excel table, is the first row your headings? So is it just the titles for each of the fields? Or notice when I uncheck the box, it starts counting it as actual data. Our first row is indeed headings, so you want to click on the checkbox, and this is the names you'll give each of the fields. Once you have that confirmed, click Next. And now this one you do have to kind of go through. Just to confirm, what this is you could interact with each of the columns down here in this preview. And notice up here in the field options section, the data will change. This is how you could format the initial fields. So notice the field name, it copies from the heading. You could change it if you want up here, but for us, we want to keep it as is. So field name, there we go. Notice that it's saying, oh, we'll get to that in a moment. But notice the data types. Usually Access is pretty intuitive. It'll look at the data already put in and guess what you would like to keep. So service ID, we want a short text. Service data, it's date with time, which maybe we do want. If you did want to change it, you could still click into the data type and change it accordingly. And the service type, short text, looks good to me. Description, short text. If you want to do it as long text, let me do it as long text. You can click in it and change it to long text. There we go. Performed by, it's also short text. And equipment ID, also short text. Okay. Once you have that set, so you've looked through each of these, and if you want to see, actually there's more. If you want to see more columns, use these little arrow keys on the bottom to scooch on over. Why does it look weird? We'll just click into when you can see the data now. And just confirm your data types. Also notice there is a check mark called Do Not Import field. If that's data you want to leave out, you would check that. For projects, we're not too concerned about it. Okay, but once you've confirmed each of the fields, you like the data types and the names, click Next. Now this window will ask you what is the primary key. Access will automatically try to default an ID for you, so a primary key. But if you have an existing one, like us, it's the service ID, then click on the Choose My Own Primary Key option, and you could choose the drop down to select the field. So we're going to keep that service ID, or you could click into the column. Notice when I click it, it changes the content in there. And that arrow was saying, hey, there's repeat data. Are you sure? Let's go ahead and click over here to the service ID. There we go. Make sure it says in that text box for the primary key. Then click Next. And then you're going to name this table. So you do have to make sure you name this table. Let's call it Services, or just Service. Here, let's just do Service History. And then you could click Finish. And you could click Close. And now you'll see here on the left, we have a service history table. And when you double click it, it has, well, remember those pound symbols means that the data is too big for the column. Let's auto fit. There we go. And all the data has been put in for you. If you still need to make changes to the properties, you could still go in and edit each of the fields, even down to using the design view. But again, that's if you have an Excel file already set up with the initial data, you can import it like this. Okay. So now we have another table related to our equipment. Let me open up the equipment field. There we go. Related to the equipment. And remember, we want to create a relationship where we're saying, hey, this foreign key for the equipment ID, when it comes to services, is pointing to this table with the equipment. So we're going to create something called a relationship. So that way, let's say if we want to, so kind of a scenario, if we wanted to see a specific equipment like this piece, the level sight laser, if we wanted to see certain services associated to the equipment, so when was it last inspected? Did it have any repairs? Right now, we would have to remember this equipment ID and then look in the service history and find each instance. Now, if we create a relationship, it makes it a lot easier. So let's go ahead and create it. First, close out of all the tables you're going to use in the relationship. So in our case, we're closing out of equipment and we're closing out of service history. And this one wants me to ensure changes. Let's click yes. There we go. Now go ahead and click into the tab called Database Tools. There we go. I get my tabs mixed up. In Database Tools, you'll see a group called Relationships, and there's a button called Relationships. Go ahead and click into it. There we go. And we'll get a new tab here called Relationships and a blank workspace. So this blank area is seen as your workspace. But along the right, you'll see the different tables that exist in our project. To start creating relationships, we need to actually get the tables into this workspace. So you could either do that by clicking on the table here on the right, and you could click and hold and drag it into the workspace. There we go. And you could move it around kind of like a little window. Or, like in this case, let me add in service history by selecting service history, then clicking the button on the bottom, add selected tables. There we go. And now we have the equipment and service history here. These tables will show a list of the fields associated to them. If you want to expand it, since these ones are too small, again, treat it like a window. You could go along its edges and make it bigger. There we go. Okay. Now, to create a relationship, so again, we want to say that this foreign key here relates to the equipment ID in the equipment ID table. What we're going to do is you're just going to click, hold, and drag that field over to the equipment ID field in the other table. So it's kind of like we're drawing an imaginary line for now. Then drop it off, and to confirm, so this is us initializing the relationship. To confirm, just make sure that here in this little table, one side says equipment ID, the other says foreign key equipment ID. If it doesn't say those, you could always click into the drop down and select. There we go, and select your field accordingly. All right. Now don't click create just yet. We want to go down to these options and select enforce referential integrity, cascade update related fields, and cascade delete related fields. All this means, well, this helps with creating a certain feature that I was hinting at before, but the cascade update related fields is, hey, if something updates in the table, then this current feature will also update. This next one is, hey, if certain data is deleted, then it will update everything within the database. Okay, and once you're done, go ahead and click create. And you'll see that a line is formed between those two fields. So now there's a physical line between those two in this program. Now to actually see that it worked, go ahead and open up your equipment table. And you'll notice something new. There's little plus boxes along the left side of each equipment record. When I click on one of the plus boxes, let's do this one for the generator. You'll see that a drop-down appears with a mini table. And this mini table shows you the services related to this equipment ID. So by creating that relationship, we could easily see anything related, so any service related to it specifically. If you want to get rid of it, go ahead and click on the little minus symbol that now appears next to the equipment. There we go. And you can do the same for any other one. Let's see if our pipeline inspection camera has any services. So click on the plus. Nope, nothing. We could check for the wheelbarrow. Has any services being done to the wheelbarrow? Nope, nothing. What about our mini tractor loader? There has been quite a bit of services. Okay. So that's the beauty of relationships. And something like this is very much what is used with large corporations like Amazon. This is how they're keeping track of data, by creating those relationships. Something like this would be very hard to accomplish with Excel. So usually all database management systems provide a way to create relationships. Okay, and with that, I believe that's pretty much everything to help you with the project. So again, take it slow, take it step by step. because again, once you get to some parts of this, if you make a mistake in one area, it could affect the entire file. But have some fun with it, test around with it. There's a lot of fun to be had with databases. And of course, if you do come across any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to me. All right, thank you.